What's up, guys? This is Marseille, aka the Property Pastor, coming at you with another great real estate video. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about property management, and we're going to answer the question, should I hire a property manager to manage my property? So whether or not that you're looking at your first property, you may have just closed on the deal, and you're kind of trying to evaluate, weigh your options on whether or not you should hire a property manager, or if you're kind of evaluating, just running your numbers and whatnot, we're going to look at a few factors to help you to make the decision about whether or not you should take those phone calls, whether or not you should manage your property yourself, or if you should outsource that task. But before we get started, before we jump into our content for today, I want to remind you to like and subscribe to this channel. I want to thank all of our subscribers who have been tuning into the content that we're putting out, who are gaining and benefiting from the value that we're putting out here to help you and your business. And what we're doing is we're documenting our journey. I'm documenting my journey so that you can learn from the things that I've gone through, some of the things I've done well, some of the things I've failed at, some of the mistakes that I've made. I want you to benefit from those things. So make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you share this video to somebody who needs to hear it. But let's look at this question. So like I mentioned, we are going to answer the question about whether or not I should hire a property manager. And for me, just to tell you my experience, when I bought my first property, I'm up to property number 8, thankfully at this point in my journey. But when I bought my first property, it was a fourplex over in the city of Newport News, which is maybe about 15, 20 minutes from where I live at. But I bought my first fourplex, and there was a property manager in place. Now, this property manager, he was, kind of more of a mom and pop property manager, but he had done a really good job. He knew the tenants really well, and he's helped me to grow my business over time. But basically what I did with him was, looked at what he was already doing for that property, looked at some of the things that I wanted to be done in my business, and we just kind of worked together and incorporated them. And every new property, we try to add new systems, new tools, and we kind of grow together. But today, I utilize him still. He's still with me to this day. And I also have another property management company, which is, they double as property management, and they do real estate, real estate sales, and so they've got agents on site and brokers and whatnot. So I'm actually doing two things right now. So I'm utilizing two different types of property management and two different sources of property management. And what that's helped me to do is kind of compare the two, learn from both sides, and figure out which one works best. But I like to have two of pretty much everything because it gives me dual source. So if one thing's not working in one area, I've always got kind of a backup. It gives me diversity throughout my business, and also helps me to learn and helps me to grow. So like I said, I definitely I do recommend personally for me, having a property manager has been golden. Looking at my situation and my scenario, this worked well for me, but that's not everybody's case. So one of the biggest things that you look at is you have to know yourself, know your own goals for your own business, and know what it is that you want to do going forward. So let's take a look at this thing. But like I said, for me, it's been a good experience. So I've got a little bit of experience on both sides. And I will say about my individual property manager that I started with, who's more mom and pop, I'm very hands-on with that side of my business. I get a very heavy hand in tenant screening. I've got a very heavy hand in maintenance selection. I get, a lot of day-to-day operations, but he answers all the phone calls. He deals with the tenants. He enforces the leases, does the screening, the advertising, all that kind of stuff. So it definitely frees me up to do what I do best and to work, basically work on my business and not be working in it. So let's look at some of the traditional roles that a property manager is going to do for you. So if you don't know what those things are, this is very important that you understand what a property manager actually does. So the property manager handles the day-to-day operations of that property, and they serve as basically the interface or the buffer between the property owner and the tenant. Right, so the property manager steps in the middle, and they provide different services, legal protections. The interface between the owner, which would be you, and the tenant, which is the person that's calling about the toilet, it's the person that's got issues and things like that. So basically, one of the big things they do is they handle the tenant issues, the things that come up. So if they got a leaky faucet, you don't want to get that call. If you don't want to get that call at 3 a.m., property manager is going to be the way to go, right? So they're going to deal with lease enforcement, depending on who you use, the property management company that I use, they've got their own leases, their own forms, their own interfaces. Pretty much it's turnkey. I don't have to do anything with them, right? But they handle all the tenant issues. They handle all of the lease issues. So a property manager is going to handle tenant issues. They're going to handle lease issues. They're also typically going to handle rent collection. All right, so they're going to basically collect rent from the tenant and then disperse a check to the owner at the end of the month. Additionally, if there's any maintenance items, they're going to coordinate that. It might be getting bids. for new roof, might be bids for toilet replacement, paint, all that kind of stuff. Typically, the larger property management companies have their own handyman, their own contractor, the contractors that they use, and they have total access to be able to go out and find any contractor that you would need for your service. Additionally, if there's a lease violation issue, folks are not paying their rent. They're making a ton of noise. They got different things like that. They're going to handle enforcing the lease. And then on the other hand, like I mentioned earlier, the tenant issue. So if they're complaining about another tenant, a neighbor, or whatever, that call is going to go to their property manager and not to the property owner. Additionally, though, and this is going to happen at some point in business, there's going to be an eviction, right? There will be an eviction at some point in your business. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So property managers will handle the eviction aspects for the property owner, and then the property owner is pretty much hands off at that point. And then on the other side, so they take care of getting people out of the property, but they also typically will take care of getting people into the property. So they will advertise the property for you. They will screen tenants, do the credit checks, the background checks, the employment verification, all of that kind of stuff to basically give the property owner options on who they want to actually put into the unit. And a lot of times the property manager will make different recommendations on what they think is best based on the tenants, based on the property itself, and based on the needs of the owner. So the property manager is a huge asset in my mind in terms of being an interface between the owner and between the tenant. So, and then another question is, well, how much is this going to cost me? It sounds like they're doing a lot of stuff. Well, how much is this going to cost me? Typically property management ranges between 8 and 12% for residential properties. Now, if you're in a commercial space, those numbers typically go down because they have a lot more units in one place. If they've got 100 units, then they're not going to charge 10% for that. Typically, that's going to be 5, 3 to 5, maybe sometimes 6%, because a lot of the property management activities can be done without having to drive across town to different properties and all that kind of stuff. So for the most part, in a residential space, if you're talking about a single family home or a duplex, triplex, or quad, you're going to be looking at 8 to 12% for property management. So now that we've kind of gone over what they do, let's see about how do I decide if this is for me or not. Very first question. So I think you need to ask yourself some questions if you are evaluating whether or not to self-manage or whether or not to hire somebody for that task. One of the big questions is, do I have the time to manage this property? Tenant management can be kind of it can be an intensive activity. One thing that happens is when it rains, it pours. So you just envision this scenario where you've got you got a leaky roof, and then you've got a tenant who stops paying rent, and then you have another unit that you need to fill, and then out of all of that, you've got just I don't know some other issue where here's one that I actually got. A tenant called me and they said, "Hey, I'm not paying rent until March." I was like, wait, what? You can't do that. So at first I was actually managing this property and just hired a new property management company. So they called me and said, "Hey, we're not paying any more rent until March because you had somebody working on this other unit and they were making too much noise. So we're not paying any more rent." And I just said, okay. So they sent me a text message. I just sent that text message to my property manager. Guess what? They're handling it. So if the tenant refuses to pay rent, 5-day, pay or vacate notice, eviction, right? So just imagine those scenarios. So you got maintenance, you got tenant issues, you got somebody you got to evict, and all that kind of stuff. So ask yourself, do I have time to do all of that? Do you have time to go to your day job, right? If most folks that are starting on a real estate investment are not going in full time, right? You may be working, a 9 to 5 job. Do you have time to take your lunch break every day and go and meet contractors? Do you have time to go to the courthouse and take vacation time off that you may not have and go to the courthouse? Do you have time to go and show a property to multiple prospective tenants, some of who may not even show up? Do you have time to manage the property? So that's one question you definitely want to ask yourself. Another question that I think is really important is, am I cut out to deal with tenants? So you guys know I'm a pastor, right? And that's what I do first. It's my passion. It's what I love to do. And I love to help people. One of the things I realized in my business was, hey, there are going to be people who will know that and try to take advantage of it. I have had that happen before, even not even doing direct property management. I've had people to find out that, hey, I was a pastor. They knew that, they try to get connected and things like that, and they stopped paying their rent. So if you're the kind of person that, is going to bend the rules, you're the kind of person that's going to, you got a real big soft spot in your heart, you got to recognize that people will take advantage of you, and the thing that happens is if that mortgage doesn't get paid by the tenants, guess who's got to pay it? You got to pay it, right? So if you're the kind of person who's going to let somebody just walk all over you and take advantage of you, right, and play to your soft side, that's going to be problematic for your business, right? Because what you're going to find is that some people just aren't they don't have great character. They just don't have great character, unfortunately, and that's just the reality of it, right? So you got to ask yourself, am I cut out for dealing with tenants? Am I cut out for this? The other thing is, do I know the laws that pertain to being a landlord? Do you know the different things you need to do to actually evict someone legally? Do you know what you need to do to protect their rights, because they have rights too? Do you know what happens if a person, say for example, I had this scenario where somebody brought in a dog, right? And they were actually a vet, and I rented to veterans and things like that. And they brought in a dog into a kind of almost a shared living space. It was a house where we were renting out single rooms. They brought in this dog, and we're like, hey, the dog's got to go. It's in your lease. You can't have a pet. But come to find out that the pet was a service animal, right? So if we just try to evict, we try to say, hey, you got to, get out and all this kind of stuff, and did that illegally, I would be opened up for a lawsuit. So you got to have a property manager who understands the law, right? So you got to ask yourself, do I know the law? Because if you don't know the laws that pertain to, tenant-landlord relations, then you can get yourself in trouble, right? You can get yourself fined, you get yourself sued, all that kind of stuff. And then the other question is, can I afford a property manager? Now, this is a little bit of a trick question, because if you are asking yourself this question and you say, well, man, I don't have 10%, to pay my property manager, you could have a cash flow problem, right? And I say that because if you're saying, well, okay, this deal is, I don't know, I'm collecting $1,000 a month in rent, and I've got $900, in expenses. And that, $100 that I would pay the property manager, I'm going to keep for myself so I can cash flow. You could be in trouble, right? Because depending on where your goals are, financially, or let's say, for example, you're only making $50, right? You could have a cash flow problem, because when all those other things, like maintenance goes up or you get an eviction, that property can be upside down pretty fast. So for me, I always budget 10% regardless. So even if I was going to manage that property, I would still charge 10%, because down the road, right, somewhere down the road, if you got 10 properties, it's going to be harder to self-manage at that point. So you want to still have that above me. I think property management should always be an expense, and you shouldn't look at it like, hey, I'm saving that, because at the end of the day, you still have to go out to the property. You still got to show. You still got to meet contractors and all that kind of stuff. So even if you're paying yourself, right, that's just to me an expense that the business should pay you. So don't I say that, right? Can I afford the property manager? The last question that I think you want to consider, which I think is very important, is how do I want to, what am I looking to do in my business, right? Because the thing about it is, if you are looking to grow your business, if you're looking to acquire, 10 properties, 15 properties, or whatever, the more time you're spending showing units, the more time you're spending, going out to the property and dealing with the tenants, more time you're spending, just in the day-to-day type of activities, that's less time you could be out looking for new deals. That's less time you could be negotiating with sellers, right? That's less time you could be actually doing a rehab on a bird deal, right? All of those things. So you got to ask yourself, do I want to be working right inside, hands-on, with this business, with this day-to-day operations, or do I want to be out looking for my next deal? Do I want to be growing the business and outsourcing this task to somebody who's actually probably way better at it than me? So that's the question that you really want to ask yourself. And that's one thing that I had to ask early on, and even with my, my property manager that I inherited at the beginning, I was really hands-on, right? I was doing a lot of stuff with him. We're on the phone a lot, advising on different things that I wanted and stuff. And now, that we've been doing this for a few years, I'm like, hey, you got this. At the end of the day, we set the foundation of what we want to do, but I'm dependent on you to handle the day-to-day. I'm dependent on you to deal with the tenants. I'm dependent on you to handle the evictions, and I'm confident that they can handle it. My other companies the same way. Like I said, when I got the call from the tenant saying they were going to pay rent, I just forwarded it to the property manager. Like, hey man, just so you know, the tenant did call me about this. This is, I trusted you guys got it. He said, yep, Marseille, don't worry about it. We got it. Don't worry a thing. And I went about my business. I went about working on my business and stopped worrying about the things day to day within my business, right? So that's important. So those are some questions I think you want to ask yourself when you're trying to make that decision. So let's say if you do decide that you want to get a property manager, the next question that we want to look at is, how do I find a good one? Right? Because do you just want to go and Google property manager, and is that going to be good enough? And you just go with the first person you get? I definitely wouldn't recommend you do that. But if you are going to find a good property manager, I think you need a few things. I think you need some references. So if you're a part of a local meetup group, a RIA group, whatnot, which you should be. If you're not a part of one, I definitely recommend you get to join those Facebook groups, go to your local meetups, virtual meetups, webinars, things like that, Zoom meetings, and all that kind of good stuff. But ask for references. Hey, you're in my market. Who do you use? Right? Who have you had a good experience with? Who do you like? And tell me why. Right? So I think that's important. And once you get those recommendations, conduct an interview. Right? So I like to have multiple options. I mentioned earlier having multiple options over here and different things I do. But as I think that you want to talk to more than one person, right? And your gut, will kind of tell you, hey, do I want to work with this person? Do I trust this person with this asset to be able to manage it for me? Right? So a couple questions I think you ought to be to ask, right? Number one, do they do inspections? Are they going to go into the unit? What do they check for and how often? So if that person tells you, hey, we go in once a year, once every 2 years, or, I haven't been in there, you want to get a good feel for how many properties they have in their portfolio. Do they have enough time to go and check on them? Do they know the state of the property? I tell both of my different property managers, I'm like, hey, I'm depending on you to take care of my asset. That asset is critical and important to me. And if if there's bugs in there, there's cockroaches and there's leaks through the toilets and all those kind of things, and the roof is leaking, and you don't know about it, that's problematic as a property manager. So I think inspections are critical. What do they check for? How often do they check? And then the other question is, how are you going to communicate with me? How are you going to tell me about different issues? There's some things that, what I do is kind of set up. Here's kind of the decision tree, right? I mean, if the house is on fire, I want a phone call. But if there's a leaky faucet, I don't need to know about that. Those things that the property manager can take care of, and stuff like that, right? But how would they communicate, and then how often? Are you going to get a report, once a month? Are you going to get calls based on, the level of urgency, based on things like that? So how do you communicate with me as an owner? Am I ever going to hear from you? If I have a question, can I get a hold of you? Will you get those questions answered for me? The other thing is I think you really want to set your expectations and see where they stand there, right? If you're telling them, hey, I want you to inspect, once a quarter, I'd like to be able to manage the property be managed this way. I want to make improvements over, one thing I do is I buy a lot of properties that are, either have deferred maintenance, or, they are poorly managed before I took them over. So we either have to cycle tenants out, or we have to do work to get that property up to speed where it is. And just to give you another example, I'm doing a rehab on one of my quad units, or I just purchased it last May. Actually this May that just passed. That in that quad, it needed work, and it was a good investment. But over time we need to put money into it. So we were getting bids, and one of the bids came in really high. And at first, the property manager was like, "Well, here's what we're looking at," and I just explained to him, I was like, "Hey, look, the payback period on what I'm seeing here is going to be this many years, and I think that's a bit much." He's like, you got a good point. So I set my expectations and say, hey, when we do these kind of jobs, I'm looking at it like this, and I have a strategic way that I want to raise rent. I have a strategic way that I want to add value to the property, and they kind of, is that, can you grab hold of that vision and kind of execute it? So we have those kind of conversations and kind of put in place how we want to move forward. So to me, that's a good sign of a good property manager. They understand what you want as an owner, and they work towards trying to cater to that. The other thing is, will I get a discount if I bring you multiple properties? So if I'm bringing you 10 properties, will I get a volume discount? You should always ask for that. I mean, it's a basic premise. It's the difference between going to Walmart and going to Sam's Club. When you buy in bulk, you get a discount, right? If they begin to bulk it, those kind of things, that might be a point of contention that you have to deal with. Other questions: how do they screen and how do they select tenants? Are they checking, what are their metrics they use? Are they doing 3 times the rent? Are they looking for a certain credit score? How do they stand with evictions? All that kind of stuff. What kind of things do they do to get the property, full? If you're kind of in a down market, how do they advertise? They putting signs down. Are they online? What are their advertising? What does that look like? And then what's your fee structure? How do you get paid? What is your rate? What do you charge me to place a new tenant? All of those kind of things, right? So there's a lot of different nuances that every property management company, they have basic things that are similar, but they do some of their nuanced things a little bit differently. So you want to understand those things as you're going in. And then the last thing I would definitely recommend you ask during that interview is, will they make recommendations to you, or do they just execute on your behalf? In other words, do they just say, hey, look, here's what you got. Tell me what you want to do, right? What I look for in my business and a good property manager is recommendations, right? So I'm like, hey, you saw it, right? Or the maintenance person saw it, or you talked directly with the tenant. Don't put the pressure on me as the owner to make a decision with limited information, right? And I think it's not to say that you as an owner can't make good decisions, but a lot of times you only got limited information. So I think what I usually ask all of my property management folks is like, hey, you understand the problem. What do you recommend? Do you recommend that we call, I don't know, a 24-hour service to come fix this? Or do we recommend waiting until the next day? All right. Do we, is this something that can wait? Is it something that's got to be urgently fixed? Is this something that we need to jump on right this month? Or is it something that, hey, down the road, next time we send the handyman out, we'll knock this one out too? Right. So I think you want to understand whether or not they're going to make recommendations, or whether or not they're just going to go and execute and just put all of it back on you. Because at the end of the day, you almost ask yourself, well, why do I have this person? They're just making a phone call and making arrangements. And I think the property manager should be more than just an admin. They shouldn't just be somebody who executes on your behalf. I think they should be somebody who's almost kind of vested in your business, with you, kind of going along to help you to achieve your goals. But then you got to realize with a property manager, though, is that no one is going to treat that house as good as you, because at the end of the day, it's human nature, right? It's not to mean that it doesn't necessarily mean they don't care, even though there are some that don't, but not to say they don't care, but at the end of the day, they're not going to go and they don't know all the ins and outs of your business, your finances, and all that kind of stuff. So, no one is going to take as good a care of it as you, but if you do want to grow, at some point you may have to let go of some of the day-to-day operations in the business. So with that being said, I believe that it is important that we understand how property management works, but you don't necessarily have to be a property manager. So I think there's a few approaches that you can take in order to gain the experience and the knowledge that you need to learn about operations, because I think that's a part of the business that a lot of people don't really like to touch, or sometimes sometimes folks take different approaches. They get really immersed in their business and don't allow it to grow because they're focused on that one property, or some folks can be totally hands off. So I think it's a few approaches that you can take, because I think we all have to understand how to run our company. We have to understand how to run our business. And I want to give you three main approaches to kind of gain some of that knowledge and experience. The first of all, if you've checked this video out and you're like, you know what, Marseille, I'm jumping in. I'm going to self-manage. I'm only looking at one property a year. I want to understand the ins and outs, and then, fine, right? And that approach is kind of take it on yourself, jump in and fail, and then learn along the way. That's okay, right? And that's perfectly fine. And I think that the big thing about that is you have to know yourself, right? And I say that because you're going to have bumps and bruises. You're going to have hiccups along the way with your property, right? So you got to know yourself. And the question you got to ask yourself is, if you get discouraged easily, if you are easily taken advantage of, this is a good way to get burned out as a landlord. I come across burnout landlords. I bought properties from burnout landlords. I've had times where I've tried to talk them into, doing things, changing a few operation steps and staying at it. And they're like, nope, this real estate investing is just not for me. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who had a property. I actually bought a propery from him, and he had a pretty good looking deal. And he's like, man, I'm just going to wholesale it. I don't want to touch it. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing, man? Keep the asset, right? But, one thing that can happen is when you have a bad experience, it can really leave a scar, and that scar can make you never want to touch that thing again, right? So if you're the kind of person that you're like, hey, I'm going to take on property management for myself, I'm going to jump in, I'm not afraid to fail, I'm not afraid, to make mistakes, I know I'm going to take my lumps along the way. Just make sure you are committed to the long term, right? Because in this journey, there are going to be peaks and valleys, and sometimes when you work into the valleys, they can make you want to give up, right? So I think it's a good thing to, there's nothing wrong with self-managing. I know I did not necessarily do that. I kind of had just a little flair for it, but I didn't deal with all of the aspects of it myself, right? But if you're that kind of person that you want to take it on by the reins, that's fine. I applaud you. Go for it. Just make sure you know who you are. Make sure you're prepared for the headaches you're going to have, right? The other thing is, if you want to outsource the whole thing, I think you got to know how to manage the manager, right? So if that, in that case, if you never touch base with them, you just depend on that, disbursement check every month, and you're like, hey, my property's running great. I'm getting my check every month. I'm assuming the property manager's going in there. You may find out that he or she has not touched that property in a year. You may find out that you got water leaks all through the place. Your unit is infested. Maintenance has been deferred. You may find those things, right? You may find that they're putting terrible tenants in there, right? If you outsource the whole thing, be careful, right? Just be careful, because you can, fire and forget, right? But I think at the end of the day, ask a lot of questions, know the state of your business. One of my favorite proverbs tells us that we ought to know the state of our flocks, right? In the Bible, the book of Proverbs says we should know the state of our flocks, right? So I think you should know the state of your business, know where your financials are, know where your properties are, how they're running, how they're performing, all that kind of stuff, right? Ask lots of questions. Make sure you are comfortable in the thing, right? So you can outsource everything, but like I said, in it, just make sure you don't fire and forget. Last thing, you can apprentice with a smaller company, right? So if you got good communications with your property manager, you're getting to give insight, you're getting to ask questions, things like that, right? I think you can build valuable experience that way, right? And you can just learn, you talk to other investors and you say, hey, I got a property manager. How do I manage my manager? You can be a part of landlord forums. You can, there's so many different, we live in an information age, and information is everywhere, right? So I think if you kind of work hand in hand with your PM, right, you'll gain valuable experience and kind of get the best of both worlds. And that's kind of what I've done over time. That worked best for me. Like I said, I didn't want to get the calls at 3:00 in the morning. That was not something that I want to do. I do enough of that, as in my other job as a pastor, not that I get tons of calls in that 3:00, but I'm saying I focus there, right? But in my real estate, I want to sleep and I want to focus on preaching. I want to focus on being a pastor. So I think if you do kind of apprentice with a smaller company, you get a chance to kind of see the inner workings. Tell them what you want to understand. I mean, tell them, if you want to learn about property management, but maybe not be the one getting a call, just walk through, right? If you're getting a report and that report says, okay, we had maintenance on XYZ, you can ask, well, why did we spend that much, right? And I like to get what I call running numbers. So every time I turn a unit over, I get an idea of what I'm going to spend in paint, what I'm going to spend in cleaning, or if I have a clogged drain line. Typically I know a sewer line backup is going to cost me this much, right? So I talk to the property managers and whatnot, because you want to be able to challenge and question your different estimates and bids, because, if they're not, if they don't really care about it, they could just go with the first price, and next thing you know, your expenses are way up, right? So just ask a lot of questions, review the paperwork, and then even you can sit in on the eviction process, and it may not even be one of your properties, right? But it might be like, hey, and even if you don't go with your PM, right, you might just take a day, go down and sit in eviction court, and just learn how the process works. I have seen evictions go horribly before, and it's a frustrating process. So again, those are a few approaches that I think you can take, right? The first one, like I mentioned, is just do it yourself, jump right in. The other one is outsource everything. And then the third one is get you a company, that's not too big where they just treat you like a number, but actually learn through that process. So that would be kind of my recommendation, is to kind of go with a smaller company, especially if you're looking to acquire multiple properties, because in acquiring multiple properties, the hands-on day-to-day management can be kind of a time-consuming and stressful activity and event and whatnot. So, hey guys, wanted to just share that with you. Hope you benefited from it. If you're looking at property management, hopefully this has been beneficial to you. If you got questions, make sure you drop them in the comment section for me. I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. And make sure you like and subscribe again to the channel. Thank you so very much for tuning in today. God bless you guys. Love you so much. Praying much success for you and your family. Take care. This is Marseille, aka the Property Pastor. Until the next video, God bless. Love you guys. Thanks again.